Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, the Kentucky legislature put together a housing task force. During last session, they met for the first time. We'll go over a little bit about what they talked about, and I'll tell you what, they wasted a lot of their time talking about something that has nothing to do with housing at all. But what can we expect? Speaking of housing, Section 8 in Louisville has millions of dollars unaccounted for. Also, we have a parent here in Kentucky attempting to take a look at what their kids are being taught, what surveys they're being given, and having to battle their way through court just to be able to take a look through open records requests at what the school system was sharing with their child. We'll talk about that story. We'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But first, please, if you're listening through a podcast platform, make sure you leave a review, share this with others. A lot of new listeners out there. Thank you all so much for joining us. Make sure you subscribe, you follow to the show. If you're listening on the radio on WZXI, thank you so much for joining us. If you love what you're hearing, make sure you tune in every day on WZXI at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. There's a replay at 9 p.m. of that day's show. So if you missed me at 9 a.m. on WZXI, which is 94.1, 95.5, and 1280 a.m. If you miss me there, don't worry. You can catch me at 9 p.m. on a replay. So we give you all those opportunities to listen to us each and every single day. Never a good reason to miss an episode. Never a good reason at all. Also, if you want to reach out to the show, please email info@theandrewshow.com. Your tips, news tips, stories, things you want me to cover, send it over to me. I appreciate it a lot. It does help me out with my research. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com to reach out. And you can also reach out to the show by visiting theandrewshow.com and hitting the contact tab. That's theandrewshow.com and hit the contact tab. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So the task force on housing was put together. Now you'll remember, those of you who listened to yesterday's show, and if you missed it, once again, head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, check out all the old shows there. But Marion Proctor, Representative Proctor, was on, and we were talking about certificate of need, something that has become quite a big problem in Kentucky. They formed a task force last year to take a look at this that came out with the recommendation of, we need more study on this. A bill on reforming certificate of need attempted to be passed this last session, but as I played for you yesterday, every single person who voted no, for the most part, said that it was too early. They needed to study this more. They needed another task force. Despite all that talking, there was not another task force formed. Instead, the leadership decided there were more important task forces to put together, and this was one of them, a task force on housing that comprises of 5 senators and 5 state house members, and they're to meet, hear from these, and then come out with a recommendation of how to fix our housing problem in Kentucky. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. I'm not saying it doesn't need to be addressed. However, the chances that this task force comes out with the actual solutions to our problems is absolutely zero. And as a good indication of that, the task force started off by hearing a lot about homelessness that's going on in Kentucky. They looked at Lexington, they looked at Louisville, they looked at homelessness in general across the way, people not having homes to sleep in. And you say, well, Andrew, that has to do with housing, doesn't it? But if you think that the vast majority of people who are homeless are actually homeless because of they don't have a home, You're taking the meaning of homeless a little too literal. Because if you take the homeless people in Kentucky and you literally just give them a home to live in, they will have destroyed it within a month, guaranteed. The vast majority of them will destroy it within a month. They would be gutted and ripped out. Everything would be tore up in there. And they wouldn't solve their problem. Why? Because they have something like a drug addiction issue or a mental health issue. And drug addiction issues and mental health issues don't have anything to do with housing. I know it seems like it should. Homelessness, right? Housing crisis. But that isn't what the people are actually frustrated about. And as indication of this, like they spent all this time on homelessness, but then they talked about some other parts about housing. At the end of it, one of the representatives asked the person that was presenting on both homelessness as well as the housing needs in Kentucky in general, and asked them an important question that is the question that really needs to be answered here. Let's take a listen.
We were talking about the homeless number, and that was a little over 5,000 across Kentucky on any given night. And then you tell us that we're 206,000 units short. Help me understand, where are those people now?
Yes. So they are people who are spending 50% of their income on housing. They are people doubled up. We have a lot of households living together because they can't afford.
So early on in the presentation, the person who was presenting on the housing issues that the committee brought in to hear from, she had mentioned that there's around 5,000 people nightly in Kentucky that are sleeping on the street, that they're literally homeless. But yet, during her presentation, don't worry, you don't have to watch all of it. I did, so I'll be able to sum it up for you. But during her presentation, she said that they are over 200,000 housing units short. Over 200,000 housing units short. And then she kind of went through some of the reasons why we'll dig into here in a bit. But you would think they would realize that let's take those 5,000 living on the street. How many of those 5,000 do you think are battling with a drug addiction? How many of those 5,000 do you think are dealing with a mental health issue? How many of those 5,000's homelessness problem won't be solved because you give them a home? There might be 10% of that 5,500 people who are literally homeless, sleeping on the street, that if you simply gave them a home, instantly their life would turn around. So instead of focusing on the fact that we have over 200,000 housing units short, that, by the way, for that 10%, if you take care of that 200,000, you probably would solve their problem anyways. Instead of just focusing on, okay, we're 100,000 housing units short. Why are we 200,000 units short? Instead of focusing on that, they say, you know what, let's spend like half of the committee hearing on the homelessness issue that has nothing to do with it. And it just goes to show, this is why I'm not super duper excited about the concept of this committee hearing, because I really don't think they're going to come up and end up in the right position. Because a part of it is they don't even understand why they're there. They don't understand why their constituents are so upset. And this is something that I was talking with a couple of reps about, and this was something I mentioned in yesterday's show, where I was talking about why is KSP's written permit testing and driver's license testing system so broke? Simply put, that the average legislator isn't having to deal with that. And the average constituent as much isn't having to deal with it, because you can renew your license online. It isn't until they have a child that needs to get a permit, or they try to get a CDL, or they have constituents trying to get a CDL, that they start to hear from constituents on the issue, but it doesn't touch their lives as much. But the housing issue that is being addressed, their constituents are upset about it, but the reason why they formed the task force wasn't because the constituents are actually upset about it. It's because the Chamber of Commerce, those of you who listen to the show often, I did a show last week called The Chamber of Communism, really going into them. But the Chamber of Commerce, who specializes in making sure that the people who pay them their dues, that pay them to lobby, well, they ensure that their pockets get lined, right? The donor class, the contractors, the builders, these people who dole out, the Realtors Association, these people dole out tens of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars every year into campaign accounts and to line these people's campaign coffers. And they want housing dealt with because they get kickbacks from it. They make money off the industry. And if they can make it off the taxpayers' back, well, then so be it. So I'll go into exactly what the issue is that constituents are mad about. And then we'll go into a little bit of how this problem got created, and then how we solve it, which probably won't be what the task force comes up with. We'll have all that after this short break. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, I was talking about how the task force on housing that was formed in the legislature met for the first time and spent a lot of their time talking about homelessness for their first meeting, which, as I mentioned, doesn't actually, giving a homeless person a house doesn't actually solve their problems. They have drug issues. They've got mental health issues. They either don't understand what their constituents are upset about or just don't care. The anger over housing that is coming from the actual rank and file voter. What is that coming from? Well, it's coming from these people who are either trying to move out of their apartments and buy a home, or move closer to work and buy a home, or trying to grow their family, not double up, not have to live at home with their parents anymore, and they just can't afford it anymore. And if those of you who listened to the last segment, she actually mentioned those things. She mentioned there's over 200,000 housing units short, though. Where are these people living? They're just not where they want to be. They're either bunched up, they're living with family, they're stuck in apartments, and they want to move out of it. But of course, that's not going to lead to more housing being built. We'll go into that in a second. But why are they stuck there? What is the exact problem? Well, I did a little bit of research for you all because that's what I do here on the show. And I just clicked around and I found, actually, it's the first home I found that was for sale that would be the closest I think you would get to like a starter home here in Kentucky or here in Lexington. Sorry. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that is currently for sale. It's 1,301 square feet. It's a little plot of land. Got a little plot lot with it. For those of you familiar with Lexington, this would be in like the Masterson Station neighborhood, okay? So I just found a random house for sale in Masterson Station that is like, when you're talking about a first-time home buyer, this is the kind of home they're going to buy, a 2-3-bedroom house, a bath or two, 1,300 square feet. They're not buying these massive, huge units, little plot of land, right? And this is the closest you get to a starter home. And that's part of the other problem, too, right now with cost of things, is that we don't have things that just are stripped down, gets the job done. Back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean like 2013, 2014, Nissan sold something called the Versa. That was a crank-windowed, you get an automatic or manual. If you got an automatic, it was $1,000 more. Had a basic stereo, basic air conditioning, crank windows, 5 seats, little car, little engine, super fuel efficient, and it was like brand new. You get the manual version brand new for $13,750, and then the automatic version was like 15 grand. And it had no bells and no Bluetooth, nothing like that, no bells and whistles. But now the cheapest new car you can buy is like $22,000. And Bluetooth and automatic and power windows and automatic engine, all that is standard now. That comes standard in it. Because they don't offer a stripped-down version anymore. Now, if they did offer a stripped-down version like a Nissan Versa, what that would do to the used car market would be absolutely insane, because you'd start having people that are like, if every single car manufacturer, Ford, Toyota, Nissan, they all made like a little 4-door sedan that had like no frills that they could sell brand new for like 15 grand. Well, the used car market would be turned on its head, because who's going to buy a used Toyota Camry with 90,000 miles on it for $14,000 when you can buy a brand new Toyota? Yeah, it's got no frills, but it's getting you from point A to point B with 0 miles on it, brand new, for the same price. You got to lower the price of that Camry down a little bit, and that would help set our used car market, which in turn would then affect the new car market and get them to fall in line. Now, of course, the dealers know this, so they're not going to produce a little car. So until somebody comes along and says, we're going to produce a small, cheap car and throw this all on its head, we're going to keep having this problem. But, we'll see what happens. But it's the same thing with housing, right? You can't get a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, shotgun house, new construction really anymore. Or you can, but they're pre-manufactured homes, but those aren't allowed in Lexington. That's another problem we'll go into here in a second. But anyways, my point is that the closest you can get to like a starter home in Lexington, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,300 square feet, little plot of land, Masterson Station neighborhood, which is a pretty good neighborhood. It's not a ritzy neighborhood, but it's like generally safe. It is for sale right now for $279,900. So, right now, a first-time home buyer, so, if you're going to do that typical 20% down, you're talking about a $60,000 down payment you'd have to set up. Now, they do offer first-time home buyer loans at 3.5% down only needed. So let's work off that instead. So right now, a 30% fixed mortgage is 7.5%. So with the 3.5% down, 7.5% mortgage rate for 30 years, your monthly payment to buy that house right now is $1,957 a month. Basically, right around about $2,000 before, of course, insurance and all those things. Now, this same house, it just so happened the same exact house was sold in 2019. And it sold for $168,550. And at the time, the interest rates were on average 3.94% in 2019. So this same house, same exact house, like it wasn't like a flip thing. They didn't do a bunch of additions, nothing like that. This same house 5 years ago to purchase cost $799 a month, basically about $800 a month. And then, of course, insurance and things. That's what people are mad about. And, of course, too, as home values go up, your home insurance has to go up with it because you're covering now larger and bigger problems, a more expensive home. But this is what people are mad about. This is what their constituents are having issues with, and they're saying this is insane. This needs to be fixed. We're talking about in Lexington, and over double the monthly cost to buy the same house 5 years ago. It's over a 50%. It's over 100% inflation rate on a mortgage cost as it was 5 years ago. And this has a trickle-down effect now into things like apartments and townhomes because this is like an assembly line. It's the same way that labor was an assembly line. And COVID threw them both off. And what I mean by assembly line is you have everybody's at a different point. And they may be moving at a different speed, right? You may be moving real quick through this. You may be moving real slow. But everybody's got a process to it, right? And the process here, when it comes to jobs, is, you get your first job or you go to college maybe, and you maybe work a job while you're there where you're like, a restaurant worker, a fast food worker, you're a server, you're something like that. You work that until you find either a better job or you graduate college, you find a better job, but you work that till you find a better job. Or maybe you move up into management there. And then you work those other jobs. And maybe if an interim job after working as a server might be working at a warehouse or a factory on the line. And then you work that job until you become a manager. Or maybe you get an office job as an admin and you work that until you become an office manager. Or maybe, you work as a manager somewhere and get moved up to middle management and then into the C-suite, right? It's a process, though. People don't come out of college going into the C-suite. It's a process to get there. And it's like an assembly line. It's like a supply chain of labor. And people are moving along that supply chain at their rates. But what keeps people in place moving around this process is uncertainty and money. The uncertainty over finances stopping you from making the leap. But when COVID came along and we laid a bunch of people off, well, they didn't know if they were going to have jobs to come back to. Then on top of that, we paid them more not to work than to work. When you look at things like how our unemployment system worked here in Kentucky, there are a lot of people making more money not working than they were working. Then you throw in a bunch more money to them through stimulus packages. And if you were a business owner, you got, PPP loans, you got all kinds of different tax incentives thrown into it. That's cash to the bottom line. So businesses ended up with a lot more money. These people ended up with a lot more money. And so that allowed businesses to restructure, but that also allowed labor workers to maybe make the leaps to the next step up or to their next process in their supply line of labor. And because that uncertainty was removed by the government, that uncertainty that was keeping them kind of in place, slowly working the process, they now jumped a step or two much earlier than they did. But because all these people jumped, it now left everybody's jumping, and now the bottom rung here is empty. or is a lot less than it was. And I'm talking about, your servers, your fast food workers, your factory workers, you're either low skill, no skill, kind of starting out in life jobs. People jumped up. Everybody jumped. People, and part of it too was people were not forced into, but a lot of people took retirement. These businesses got extra money in, they're laying people off. They said, look, you're going to retire in 2-3 years anyways. Let's just get rid of you now. But in those 2-3 years, there would have been people coming up to those levels. And so you ended up with this labor shortage. And that labor shortage then ends up driving up wages. Wages drive up costs. But then as that labor catches back up, as that fill-in happens, either people that took the jumps too early, they're not good enough, they get knocked back down. People are graduating high school, kids, the labor laws change to reach down lower to kids. As illegal immigration comes in, and that comes in and fills in those positions. Well, now, though, they can afford for wages, especially the low skill or no skill wages, to come down a bit more. That doesn't mean that prices haven't now raised up, because the cost of doing business everywhere along the line has increased in costs. So in the same way that there's a supply line of labor, there's a supply line of houses. People are at different points of their homes. They're maybe staying with their parents, apartments, out buying houses, afraid to move to the next. But when COVID comes in, you have record low interest rates and you're blowing cash into the system, cash into their pockets. And now they have the down payments to buy the houses, or they have this. And then you have now people going out and buying homes, causing a massive increase in home costs. Mortgage rates are still low, but now with inflation becoming a problem, they crank up mortgage rates, and this is how we're sitting. There's a few other things that affected this, and there's a few other things causing this housing shortage we'll talk about after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back with The Andrew Cooperrider Show. We've been digging into the housing issue in Kentucky, as there has been a housing task force formed. And I'm just kind of going through the problem, at least in my opinion, the economics behind this, what's caused this issue here. We talked about COVID affecting kind of the supply line of housing, because a lot of crazy things happen. You blow money into the system. People aren't working. People feel free to make the leaps that they haven't made before. They got a lot of extra cash, a lot of extra in savings. They can make those jumps, but then inflation happens. They got to increase mortgage rates, but now the homing prices are high. And then people are frozen, because you got two things together. You got mortgage rates high, home prices high. Well, people are frozen now. They're not moving because everything costs so much, which is now creates a spiral of there's not going to be more housing on the market. People are stuck where they are. That's what the constituents are mad about. They're mad that they can't move forward because there's nothing available for them to do so. The supply line's been thrown off. Then you throw into other issues on top of that, causing this supply of actual single-family homes to go down. You got things like, cities putting in place zoning regulations that don't allow, for an example, this is something they actually brought up in the committee hearing a little bit, is that, you got zoning regulations in places like Lexington and Louisville that don't allow prefabbed homes or manufactured homes. Those typically people think of those as like trailer park trailers. But prefabbed homes are like, homes that come in on a truck and they get bolted together, but they're not exactly like, they're nice homes. And you can get one of those new a lot of times for $80,000, $90,000, deliver them out to a place that can help affect the cost of homes, but they don't allow that in places like Lexington. So that's not an issue that's not an option for first-time home buyers. In fact, Lexington engages in something else I've talked about a fair amount on the show called PDR, where they go around buying up property development rights from agricultural land in Lexington, because they go ahead and say, hey, look, we want to keep these rolling hills, so let's buy up the rights to develop to make sure you can't sell your land to a housing developer that will offer you a pretty penny because they want to build houses. Instead, we've bought up the property development rights. You don't have that choice. And so you have cities actively putting in place regulations and restrictions to limit housing. Now, Lexington and Louisville are doing this, and a lot of reasons, because they want people to build up. They don't want you to build out anymore. They want you to build up. They want to force everybody into these apartments. See, that's part of the other issue here, is that unless this task force acknowledges that cities are, through their planning, are trying to make you live in an apartment, the problem will not get fixed either. You have to recognize that they're actively trying to force you into that, and your constituents aren't happy about it, and it's causing increased home prices. And Lexington or Louisville's issues bleed out into the rural counties around it because people start moving outside of town to try to find affordable houses because they don't want to be stuck raising a family in an apartment their whole life. So, anyways, you blow money into the economy. You also got private companies buying up homes because they have nowhere else to park their cash. And then to throw on top of that, you now have government deciding they want to go ahead and do economic development. Now, this was something that in the hearing they touched upon, but when you come in and do this economic development, like you saw like in Hardin County, for an example, where the Blue Oval plant's coming in, we got all these construction workers. They say, we're going to bring in 5,000 jobs to the area. Now, of course, Ford's revised that down to more like 2,500 jobs, but even 2,500 jobs into the area. That's 2,500 people plus their families as well. And assuming both husband and wife don't work at it. So you're talking about another 5,000 people into the area potentially, not to mention all the auxiliary businesses that come along with it. You suddenly have a demand for 5, 6, 7, 8,000 more housing units needed in that area due to government economic development. And a lot of these places are having what I call a crisis of identity. You have cities and towns. You have towns like Georgetown. You've got cities like Lexington. You've got cities like Louisville and towns like Somerset that say we want economic development, we want growth, but also are demanding that they keep this rustic feel. And so while they're blowing tax dollars into bringing more jobs into the area, they're simultaneously doing everything they can to force people to either live in apartments or disallow housing to come into the area, make it very, very difficult on them. And so it's really a double whammy to the taxpayer. I'm going to take money out of your pocket to then give to a private company to bring jobs to an area that, by the way, nobody needs because everybody here has a job. You know, unemployment is record lows. So we're going to bring jobs into an area that doesn't need jobs. You know, I went over this with Hardin County, right? I'm sure the governments there would love jobs, but there wasn't really a large amount of unemployed people in Hardin County, but they're bringing 5,000 more jobs. Supposedly that was the plan, if not more, there in the first place. Now that causes demand for housing, but you brought those companies in by taking money out of the taxpayer's pocket. Double whammy. Now, are they going to admit this? No. In fact, in the hearing, they're still saying, well, due to 2008 financial crisis, we're still feeling it. They've refused to acknowledge that the root cause is government intervention. So what is their ideas going to be? Because remember, this task force is supposed to come up with policy suggestions to fix our housing problems. Are they going to recognize that every step of the way, the housing problem has been caused by whether it's local or state or federal, but it's been caused by government intervention in the first place? And so the way you solve it isn't by more government intervention. You recognize, oh no, we caused this because we can't keep our hands to ourselves. We can't keep our sticky fingers out of our taxpayers' pockets. We can't stop trying to buy off private corporations' donation money and keep trying to bring jobs into an area that doesn't need them. We can't just stop trying to force everybody to live and think like we do. We can't stop it. And so instead, we're going to say more cowbell. We're going to demand more government intervention into this. The ideas they're going to come up with, it's not going to be deregulation. It's not going to be, you know what, maybe we stop economic development in an area that doesn't have housing. You know, it'd be great for the state to make a rule. The state made a rule. Now, granted, those of you who listen to the show know, generally speaking, I'm against economic development coming from the government because it's just redistribution of taxpayers' wealth into private companies' pockets. You know, it's never going to a small business owner to help them open up. It's always going to some Fortune 100 or 500 company that's owned by billionaire stockholders or run by a bunch of billionaires and millionaires that have never stepped foot in Kentucky. No, we're not gonna give it to the Kentuckian. And even that, I would argue, just deregulate. I'm sure that would help the regular Kentuckian open up a business. So I'm against it in general, but if they made a rule that said, look, if you don't have at least X percentage of free housing in your area, we're not going to give you any state economic dollars. If they made that rule, how many of these counties do you think would deregulate? Now, I'm not asking for more regulations there. Remember, I'm actually asking for less. I'm asking for the state government to spend less on economic development. And I'm saying that if these counties want state tax dollars for economic development, or these cities, then they better have enough housing for the economic development. We're not going to steal money out of your taxpayers' pockets to then force them to have nowhere to live. They have no upward mobility in their housing. But they're probably not going to do that. Nope. Their suggestion is going to be, you know what? We need more government housing. We need more government intervention. You know, like Bashir spending $233,000 per apartment unit in Western Kentucky to build, quote unquote, affordable housing. Sucking more money out of the taxpayer's pocket and blowing it on bloated government salaries and then massive kickbacks for campaign donors in the form of bloated government contracts. In what world does it cost $233,000 per apartment to build an apartment? That doesn't make any sense. And as more evidence of this, we've got a story coming out of Louisville regarding a Section 8 scandal whistleblower talking about millions of millions of federal dollars are missing. And what did the whistleblower get for bringing this up? You think he was patted on the back? Well, to find out about that, you're going to have to wait till after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, I alluded to an issue going on with Section 8 funds in Louisville. This from WDRB headline: whistleblower suit claims Louisville's housing authority is short $17 million in federal Section 8 funds. This now from the article. A whistleblower claims millions of federal tax dollars are missing from the Louisville Metro Housing Authority. According to the lawsuit, $17 million in federal Section 8 money is unaccounted for. Section 8 funds are used to house low-income families, the disabled, and older people. When the whistleblower brought this to the attention of federal officials, he was fired. According to the lawsuit filed in Jefferson Circuit Court, Matt Swain, the now former supervisor of OSHA Safety, Security, and Investigation, was told by an unnamed Louisville Metro Housing Authority deputy director that as much as $17 million of Section 8 money was unaccounted for. Swain took that information to a federal employee, and within 4 days of doing so, he was suspended without pay, and then he was fired for 2 weeks later. According to court documents, Swain was alarmed at the fraud, waste, and mismanagement throughout the agency, including a form of fraud that is pervasive among Louisville Metro Housing Authority properties called subletting. And what this form of fraud is they take Section 8 housing, they take their Section 8 voucher. Okay, so how Section 8 works is you get a voucher from the government to pay chunks of your rent. So then you go and you rent that property from, of course, a landlord. Well, the fraud here is that somebody qualifies. So like, let's say it's a single mom with 2-3 kids or something, qualifies for a 4-bedroom house. Well, she then goes around and either A, stays living with her parents that she was maybe living with already and just sublets the entire apartment out. So the government's paying the rent to the initial owner landlord, and then the person who was awarded the Section 8 voucher is now renting out the apartment to just somebody else, making, profit on it, like she or he owns the unit themselves and is the landlord. Or they're going in and they're renting chunks of it and then going ahead and they qualify for a 4-bedroom. They got, 3 kids and themselves, and they go ahead and they put, 2 kids in 1 bedroom, them in another bedroom, and then sublet out the other 2 bedrooms and make money off that. Another thing you see in Section 8 is, especially with single moms here, is that a would-be husband, but a boyfriend, a girlfriend, have a child, And for those of you who are unaware, you don't have to anymore put the father's name on the birth certificate when a child's born. You don't have to put their name on it, okay? And so the child's born, no father on the birth certificate, and until you ask for actual cash money from the state will not even attempt to go after the father for funds. And that's assuming, too, that the mother even says who the father is. They can claim they don't know who the father is. Could be a lot of people. But until you ask for cash money, they're not going after it. So what happens is a single mom goes out, gets Section 8. Most time I guess it could be a single dad, the other way around, but most time it's single mom. Gets Section 8 voucher, and then uses the Section 8 voucher to rent the unit, quote unquote unit, or apartment or house from the father of the child or children. And so the father owns the unit, rents it to the mother, they get a Section 8 voucher. The father lives with them anyways. That's another fraud that happens. He's saying, look, this is pervasive. So you've got that fraud going on in Louisville Metro Housing Authority. On top of that, you have 17 million missing. And what do they say to it? They tell me I'm an awful person for saying, look, we should require people pulling benefits to either volunteer, go to school, or work. Like, you're an awful person. You don't know people's position. $17 million missing and pervasive fraud. The guy who brings it up, fired. In other news, this one from Bloomberg Law. Very interesting story here regarding a Miranda Stovall who sued her local Kentucky school board in June, which has now turned into a national debate over parental access to educational materials when there's a copyright dispute. So basically, Stovall learned that her child and others in grade 6 to 12 would receive a mental health screener. So in January 2023, she submitted a public records request for a copy of the survey, but the board denied the request, citing copyright law. So they give a survey to your child on their mental health, and you ask to see it, and they're like, no, that's IP. That belongs to the company's intellectual property, and if that gets out there, well, then they can't make millions putting out this survey anymore. Well, if you had to legally hide something from the parents, if it's even an argument at all, that you have to hide something from the parents that you're giving to their kids because of intellectual property rights, then it shouldn't be given to the children. Absolutely, period. Imagine somebody feeds your child something, and you go and ask for the company's recipe because you're wondering what's in it. You know, your child has allergies. And they're like, no, that's intellectual property. We can't tell you what's in it. That'd be crazy. Of course you could see what's in it. You've got ingredients. You know what allergens are in it. That's on the back. I mean, this is absolutely insane. And instead of just doing everything they can, bending over backwards, they're doing everything they can to stop Miranda Stovall's lawsuit. They don't want to show it to her. Or they don't want to show her the screener. They don't want to be publicly available. It's probably they don't want it publicly available because they don't want people like you and me to see it. Because the company's not dumb. Okay? Think of all the things they can wrap into a mental health screener. You know, think of all the LGBTQ sexuality questions. Think about all the questions about race and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion questions. I mean, that's probably what the mental health screener's for, is to figure out how diverse they are. Think of all the questions they probably ask them about things like racism and those types of issues. For all we know, they're asking them about things like, what's your faith? And they don't want parents knowing, because if you knew what they were showing your child, you might get upset about it. And if you get upset about it and you go to the school board, well, the school board's no longer going to be paying Pearson for their mental health screener. And this goes into the overall argument. Why, we're talking about IP and everything else, but, the real question here too, which of course the media is not going to ask, is why is it that the school feels it necessary to screen every single one of their children, grades 6 through 12's mental health? Why do you feel that is even the school's role in the first place? That should be the real conversation here. And so any legislator worth their stones would immediately, as soon as session comes in, be proposing a law that says any learning materials that you cannot share with a parent due to intellectual property concerns are not allowed in Kentucky schools. We'll call it the Parental Transparency Act. Let's add into that another bill that says also stop worrying about mental health in our K through 12 education. You can't, what do we want? Another thing for them to fail at? They can't even teach reading and math. I mean, less than half of Kentucky students are proficient in reading and math. And you want those people to be the ones in charge of asking your children about mental health? Why? So they can fail at that too? Absolutely crazy. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank you all so much for joining me. Please make sure you come back tomorrow. As always, if you want to reach out to the show, email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the contact tab, and reach out to the show that way. You guys have a great rest of the day. Till tomorrow, we'll be seeing you.